Town Bank Mortgage, NMLS number 512138, is an equal housing lender. This podcast is for informational purposes only. And now, the man born with the 5 o'clock shadow and with the NMLS number 2028-201. He is a gentleman. He is a scholar. He is
Tyler Cralle.
All right, welcome everyone to the latest edition of the Cape Fear Report. We are back after my vacation, after Azalea Festival. Time to get back to work here in Wilmington, and we're kicking things off right. Very honored to have my next guest here joining me on the program. The man, the myth, the legend, Lee Crouch is here with us. And Lee, thanks for being here, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to see you.
And so, as I always start out, Lee, I like to talk about how people got into real estate. And so tell us that journey, because I know you had a few jobs before you became a realtor.
So, yeah, I graduated from college in 1978 and went to work for a bank and realized that working for a bank, I wasn't going to make much money. But
Really?
Well, it was a really good bank. I looked good. I had no money, but I had a nice suit. So, yeah.
Probably a good office, too.
Oh, very special. But so a year after I had been at the bank, I decided maybe I should get my real estate license, which was 1979. So that was like last century. But back in those days, you could get a full broker's license with a 30-hour course.
Oh, really?
So I took the course and actually passed the exam.
First try?
Yeah,
that's pretty good.
I mean, I was shocked. But so I still worked at the bank for another year and a half, and then a guy called me at the bank and said, "Hey, we're looking for these young guys to go to work as a stockbroker." And so I said, "Well, that doesn't sound like a bad gig." And they had hired somebody out of MBA school for the job I wanted. And I said, "Well, I'm going to be the guy that always gets ignored. So I guess what I'll do is go talk to these guys about being a stockbroker." So I did that for 7 years. And,
wow.
And it was, I liked the job. It was interesting. It was a challenge. And I liked it better than banking, but it wasn't really my first love. So in 1987, actually November 1st, I went to work for Intracoastal, and I'd interviewed with 3 different brokerage firms. One brokerage firm had a lot of, I guess you'd call it nepotism in the firm. And I'm like, well, I'll never be the right guy, because I'm not a son. And like the guys a lot, I just, it was like, that wasn't going to work. Yeah. And then the other firm, it was too much, there were a lot of fat between the top guy and the agents, and I thought, well, this is going to be not such a great adventure. And so I went and talked to Jim, and Jim had just hired a couple of agents, and he said, if I hire you, I may lose 1 or 2 of these agents. And I basically told Jim, I said, well, I know how to sell. Yeah. I said, I don't have a whole lot else I can bring.
So what was the reasoning for why the other agents would leave?
Because they'd just been hired. And
I got you. Okay.
So I was going to be the 9th agent at Intracoastal.
Okay. Wow.
And I was the only other guy. So so I said, well, Jim, I know how to sell. And I said, you give me a chance and I'll prove myself. He said, well, I don't have any room for you. And I said, well, you got a conference room. I got a desk at my house. I'll bring it to the office. He goes, well, what about if they need the conference room? I said, I'll just pack my stuff up and walk out and they can have the conference room. So we did that. And I went to work, in 87. My first closing was like probably 6 months later. It was getting a little cold that winter. I go do an open house at Wrightsville Dunes and get home, and my wife would say, well, how was your open house? I said, it was a great football game. And she said, you're supposed to be selling real estate. And I was like, but nobody came. I mean, this is late 87, early 88. And, I was doing anything I could do to get business. I was working pretty much 24/7, and a friend of mine came up to me and they said, well, you keep working that hard, you're going to die. And I said, well, no, you don't understand. I said, I have debt, I got no income, and if I don't keep doing this,
I'm going to die.
I'm going to die. So that first year was a little lean, but my first full year, I was the agent of the year.
Oh, wow.
And so a couple of the agents came up and they blamed me for having rich relatives, and I can't believe you just fell into all this business. And I'm like, I'm always at the office, and some of the folks in the office decided on a nice day they'd all go to the beach together. So I sit there and do duty, every day that I could get it. And people walk in, want to buy a beach house. Now, waterfront beach house in those days in '88 was like $300,000 to $350,000.
Wrightsville?
I read Wrightsville. Oh yeah. And Jim had just closed the Carolina Beach office because it was that slow there.
Yeah.
But I had, I've had great relationships with a lot of folks over the years that I got that were walk-ins from day one. And, they would come in and say, this one guy wanted to buy a condo. And I said, he said, well, a friend of his and he might buy a house together. Mm-hmm. And I said, you ever owned a boat with somebody else? He said, yeah, it was awful. so he actually ended up buying the house by himself, without a partner. So, but, it's been a lot of change over the years.
Almost 40 years.
Oh, yeah.
So, and what's interesting is, some realtors stay where they're at, but a lot of realtors kind of jump around.
Right.
And so obviously you've been with Intracoastal since the beginning.
Right.
And so, that is kind of a unique thing. And so has it just been sort of the Intracoastal culture and sort of Jim's leadership?
Yeah, I would say it's the culture. Jim and our close friends, he gave me a chance and every time there was a chance that came along that looked better or different, and I thought about leaving, I'm like, if it's not broke, why would you mess it up?
Yeah.
And I know a lot of agents that have left because it was a better mousetrap. They get more commission the first year or whatever, and then they come back and they're like, this is pretty good.
Grass is not greener sometimes.
Right. And so going back to the late 80s, early 90s, and Jim would hire these other agents, and I had the feeling these ladies had when I came on board. It's like, oh man, he just hired 5 agents, and there's 15 of us now. So how many are there now? Like 400 agents? I mean, it's just crazy. But it's like you carve your own niche, and you stick with what you know, and it can turn out fine. But you got to work at it.
Yeah, that's really good advice for anything, but especially real estate, because there is so much kind of diversity with real estate,
right,
especially in this area. I mean, you got people who know downtown, you got people that know the beach, you got people that know Monkey Junction, you got people that know the country club area. I mean, so it's like there's all these different areas in the Wilmington area. Now, of course, we got Brunswick and Pender, and so that definitely seems like an important part of real estate is becoming an expert at least in one area to really kind of separate yourself.
Well, and I think in that regard, you've got to tell your audience what you do.
Yeah.
Because if you don't tell them, you're a jack of all trades and master of none. Mm-hmm. And so my wife and I gone to Raleigh years ago, and I picked up a real estate guide, and it had this ad about this lady, and it says, why should you call Phyllis? And her name was Phyllis Wilborski, and it says, because Phyllis measures up. And I'm like, that's brilliant. And so I come back, and Jack Davis had just started the Cape Fear Real Estate Guide. And so I said, Jack, I want to run a half-page ad in your guide. He goes, okay, that's great. And so, basically I advertised myself as a waterfront specialist because I grew up here and knew a lot about the waterfront, but I didn't know a whole lot about kitchens and neighborhoods for schools and this, that, and the other. So I said, well, I'm the waterfront specialist. And so by telling people that, that's kind of what you become if you can produce.
Yeah.
So, the agents in the office, they didn't really like that a whole lot because they said, well, Jim Wallace will never advertise again because you're doing these ads. And, I'm like, I didn't open the can of worms. It's just out there, and you got to realize that's how the market is. If you promote yourself, and, over the years we did a lot of print advertising, but, more recently it's just like, it might work, it might not. It's hard to track it.
Mm. Well, it's interesting about the late 80s because I think a lot of people forget that, they think the 80s is being a boom time, but I believe like the late 80s, early 90s, there was a minor recession.
Oh, yeah.
And so what was that kind of like getting started in that kind of environment?
So, the first Iraq war was like 91 really. Mm-hmm. And I had a listing on a neighborhood off Wrightsville Avenue, and they had built probably 2 or 3 specs that they were framed up. They dug the trenches for the sewer lines, and everything just shut down. It looked like, Wrightsville Avenue in that neighborhood had been bombed.
Oh, wow. They
moved everything out. The banks cut them off. It was like, oh, this is not good. Because I'm like, man, I got this great new neighborhood, and we'll be selling all these houses, and it went just dark.
What, because rates popped up and
rates went up. The banks shut down lending.
Oh, wow.
Because they didn't know where we were going.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So
it is sort of interesting because obviously over the 40 years you've seen sort of the ebb and flow of real estate here in Wilmington. And so, I guess we can kind of start with sort of, actually before we get to sort of the changes, I do want to talk about how you got a lot of business with the walk-ins because real estate's obviously changed with the way advertising happens.
Right.
And, you talk to a lot of people that work in offices, and the walk-in traffic from what it used to be is a lot less. Like a lot of people now find realtors, maybe online or wherever it is. And so, I guess kind of talk about how, where you get your business from has sort of changed, where you were getting a lot of walk-ins and advertising in those real estate guides, and sort of what's changed kind of.
Yeah.
Now.
So back in that day, you'd really want to put a sign on a property, because if somebody's riding around the beach and wants to buy a beach property, they'd see your sign. Mm-hmm. And so we had a pretty good, amount of inventory at Wrightsville Beach. And, so people would see the sign, they'd walk into the office, because we didn't have but one office at that time. But, as times changed, it's like, I think people scour the internet daily to see if anything comes up in that area they want to buy in. And so, what I like to do is, when I list something that people let me do an open house, is do an open house on Saturday and Sunday, or, most times weekends are better, because people are just out riding around. Yeah. Like a summer day that it's raining, and people were going to go to the beach, they'll show up at your open house, and they may not buy the property that you're doing the open house in, but what they'll do is you'll get their contact information, and they'll tell you what they want to buy. If a house came up in this neighborhood, that's exactly what we want. We can't afford Wrightsville Beach, but, we want to be close to the beach. Yeah. So, it's just basically knowing what somebody wants and being able to find it. The other thing is, they may tell you exactly what they want. I had a couple that bought a Dune Ridge unit when they were brand new, and what they told me was they wanted to buy a house at Wrightsville Beach that was brand new in a certain price range. And I'm like, you won't find anything in that price range that's single family, but they wanted something new. So I thought, okay, let's go to Dune Ridge. They bought a Dune Ridge unit. It was oceanfront, and that was the other thing they wanted with a single family home. And I'm like, well, you'll never find it at that price. But they owned the unit for several years, and it was great.
Well, I mean, and so that's something that's probably changed, right? Where back in the day, consumers having access and knowing what is available and what's coming online was, zero. And now with, the Zillows and the Realtor.coms and the Homes.com, now everyone out there has access to seeing what's being listed. And so, do you still have people who call and say, hey, I'm looking for a property? Because, real estate agents, you guys do sometimes know before a property hits those sites. And so does that still come into play, or is it really a lot of your clients are just looking on the websites?
No, it does come into play, because if somebody's been looking in a neighborhood for a long period of time, and the inventory's tight, then they'll call agents they know specialize in that market. So, I had somebody call me last week, and they want a one-story house, midtown, in decent shape in a certain location. I'm like, well, there's 5 to 10 houses that'll meet that criteria, so it's going to be a tough one to find, but it may come up. And so
it is sort of interesting, because looking at the inventory levels right now, and they got so low during COVID, I think historic lows, right? That now that inventory levels have reached somewhat levels of normalcy, people are like, oh no, there's too much inventory. But really, when you actually look at it, especially in some of these desirable neighborhoods, there's still a pretty big shortage of homes available. And so that's got to be kind of interesting when talking to people, because, you look at the numbers and you're like, oh, total inventory might be back to normal, but certain neighborhoods are still seeing massive shortages.
Right. Yeah. You look at some of the beach markets. Yeah. We're seeing more listings coming on, and I think part of what's pushed that along is the cost of insurance, the age of the owner. They go to the family members and say, hey, I can't afford to keep this thing, and pay all these bills every year. Does anybody want to buy, me out of the house? Y'all can keep it as a family, or one family member with money can buy us out. And if that doesn't happen, then they're going to list it on the market. But it's the taxes. They've gone way up too. And so, if somebody's on a fixed income and that's the biggest asset, they may have to sell that house just basically to be able to fully retire and not have to worry about, hurricanes and expense in going forward. Yeah,
insurance too. That's the other, elephant in the room. And so it's got to be interesting, as you were talking about when you first got in real estate, you could buy a house at Wrightsville Beach for $300,000, and now, you can't even get on the island for under $1 million, and that's a condo, probably not even close to having a view of the water. Oh yeah. And so that has, as you mentioned, obviously it's impacted people who are living there. It's a great windfall for them. But when all of a sudden your house is worth, 5 times what you paid for it, that means your taxes are going to go up, your insurance is going to go up.
Right.
And so what has been the big change to you? I mean, I guess obviously clientele. Is it now you're seeing a lot more people from out of the area who are buying that second home, where back in the day you may have someone who lived maybe, more inland and was buying a house at Wrightsville Beach just to have a second house, and now it's gotten to the point where it's just out of most people's price ranges.
Well, and I think, there's basically 2 types of buyers. There's a buyer that grew up in the area. Mm-hmm. They've gone to New York or gone to, the West Coast or Chicago and done really well. And they've always wanted a certain type of property at Wrightsville Beach or Figure 8. And so when they get to that, net worth or a point in their life, then they're going to buy whatever they want to because they've got the money. The other ones are people coming in from the big cities that are not from the area, but they, let's say they go to Florida, they go to Ocean Reef, they go to Palm Beach, they go to Aspen, Colorado, or Vail, and they look at these upper end markets, and they go, at Ocean Reef, an oceanfront house may cost $30 or $40 million, and at Figure 8, I can buy something like that for 10.
Yeah.
Well, we think it's a lot of money, and they're like, "This is if I'm gonna buy something in the floodplain, I'd like to buy it a lot cheaper because they may self-insure if they pay cash."
Yeah.
But so an old guy told me years ago. He said that the premier markets will lead our market locally by about 7 years. He said, if that house is $10 million somewhere else in 7 years, that house that's selling for $3 or $4 million should be about that price.
Oh wow.
Now that's historically. And, if you look at, it's like Trey talked about in the sales meeting this morning, about a 4% appreciation in 26. Well, 3 to 5 used to be kind of the standard appreciation. And like if it was waterfront, it might do 7 to 10%. But we've seen so much appreciation from COVID and, just supply and demand that, whether it can still do 7 to 10%, who knows? But I think it gives people a sense of comfort, the fact that, there's demand and limited supply that'll support that market unless we have a catastrophic issue with the economy or, who knows what can come up. But, it's just as people get older too, they come and look at stuff and they go, it's too much money, I don't want to do it. Then they get, 10 years older and they go, it's too much money, I don't want to do it. And then they get to a point where they're retiring and they're like, I should have done it. I'm not going to get any younger. And they just, it's like a friend of mine said, well, I'm going to buy a house today because I can't wait any longer. And, it's just the way the market is. Plus, they, as the grandkids get older and the kids are, they want a gathering place. Yeah. And so, you see some folks that buy a second home in Wilmington to be near Wrightsville Beach because it's a public beach, or they want to be near Figure 8 because they got family there, but they can't afford a beach house there. But they could go to some other neighborhood and spend $1 million, and it provides housing for when they're all down, and so it's just there's different reasons why people do different things, but I think if you look at the other markets, we're still a good value.
Well, what do you think has been the bigger sort of distortion for home buyers and sellers? Was it 2008 or was it COVID? In that people, because we had a crash, which is crazy, right? Because if you look at the data, there's been 2 real estate crashes in American history, 1920s because of the early 30s because of the stock market crash, where of course if you go back and look at the lending, there was no mortgage coming. It was very weird. Like you had to put 50%. I mean, it was just a very weird market. And then of course 2008.
Right.
So it's very uncommon. But 2008 happened, and now everyone's like, oh, well, there's going to be another crash at some point, thinking that that's a common thing.
Right.
So that's distorted people into always thinking that there's going to be some big run-up and then a crash. And, you have people predicting a crash in 2021, and here we are 5 years later, and there's been no crash.
Right.
But then also during COVID, you had this huge run-up in appreciation, where now sellers are thinking that, I bought a house 2 years ago, so now my house is worth 40% more than what I paid for it.
Right.
And so which do you think has caused more distortion for home buyers and sellers? Was it 08 or do you think it was COVID? Or combination?
It's hard to say. I mean, it's like with our local market, it really got devastated because of just, people running out of money. They couldn't borrow money. And there was, a lot of foreclosures. And so when people would put, houses for sale, they wouldn't sell until the banks took them, and then they'd just give them away.
Yeah.
So, that was an issue. But, the COVID market blew me away because I started out thinking the COVID market is going to be like a Force 5 hurricane coming through, and everybody's going to be just devastated. And it's going to be a terrible situation because, you just didn't know what was going to happen. And all of a sudden, 2 weeks after it started, people were coming out of the big cities going, I'm going to get the hell out of New York or Chicago because I can't go outside. I can't go to work, but I can work remotely and I can go to the beach. And, so all these people showed up and their friends were like, where are you? Well, I'm down at Wrightsville Beach. And they go, well, I'm going too. So, it's so talking about COVID though, my grandfather in 1918 moved to he got out of med school. He moved to Raleigh, North Carolina, and he was the first state epidemiologist for the state of North Carolina.
Wow.
For 2 years.
The only one?
The only one. And so when Fauci would come on TV and start telling these people, you got to social distance, you got to wear a mask.
Yeah.
And my grandfather would tell about, the Spanish flu epidemic. Yeah. And I never really understood what he had to do. And I'm sure they thought he was crazy and said, no, where the party's on, we're going to keep going. Because it was the 20s, or getting ready to be this.
They said that actually that was what's interesting about the Spanish flu was that the worst part of it was they actually successfully did shut everything kind of down like we did.
Right.
But then they reopened thinking they'd fixed it. And then that was when you saw the vast majority of the death was that they then couldn't get it. They couldn't get everyone to come back inside again because everyone thought that we did it, it was over, and we're good.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I think everyone was so scared about during COVID was that you were going to have that moment where everyone said, oh, I guess it's over now, and then we're going to go back. And so I think that's what scared so many people about the Spanish flu was it wasn't the first wave, it was the second wave that took most people out.
Yeah, exactly. So, there's this haunting voice saying, it's really bad, and so I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea. And here we go. It's kind of like the crash in 29.
Yeah.
The government fixed it. They put regulations. The Federal Reserve put regulations on margin calls, and it used to be you could put next to nothing down and trade stocks, and so when the crash happened, there was all this leverage that took it down.
Yes,
because they couldn't make the margin calls. Once you jump off a building, it's hard to show up and pay the money in.
Well, it's funny you mentioned being a stockbroker because when I was in high school, that was like my dream job.
Right.
Like I was like, I'm going to be a stockbroker. I was in high school during the 90s, so it was the run up of the .com.
Oh yeah.
And, I remember telling someone one time in class, I was talking to one of my classmates and I was reading like the financial paper and I said, yeah, you want to buy a stock like Yahoo that only goes up. Funny telling people about Yahoo now, talking to some young person, they don't even know what that is. But that's a job that's gone. Because you can buy stock with E-Trade, you can use Ameritrade, you can buy stock online. Now you got I can't remember what the name of the online one is that you can buy stock for free.
Yeah.
So now what you have is financial advisors, and so the job changed drastically. Where stockbrokers were basically just
it's more money management. Yeah. And they want to know your whole financial picture.
Yeah.
And then they'll tell you, okay, here's what we think you should do.
Yeah. Where stockbroker was like you're just a middleman.
Right. Well,
said,
and we thought
Coca-Cola.
we were money managers, but we weren't.
And so that's a job that's kind of gone. And so a lot of people are talking about AI and how it's going to impact real estate.
Right.
And so, I mean, do you see sort of like, we just talked about where people going from being a stockbroker to a more sort of like over kind of arching kind of more job where you're a financial advisor? You see the same thing kind of happen with realtors where it's going to be a change?
I'm not sure. I think the personal element is important because, I mean, I've got buyers that they like kind of the history behind the house that they're looking at. And I know a lot of the history because I knew the owners previously. And so to be able to tell that story, it's like, I think it's homes.com, I think has got this new ad about AI and how you can call this AI person and he'll tell you they're white quartz countertop. And you're looking at the picture and like, well, I know they're white quartz countertops. And I'm like, it's maybe it'll work, but I don't know. I think a personal element to it is important. I'm sure there'll be, some kind of a trading shop that sets up and be discounted, and they'll just say, we're not doing anything other than writing the paperwork, or you'll get an attorney to write the paperwork, and it's a transaction. But you got to figure out where the marketplace is. You got to have your buyer and sellers together to make that trade.
Well, I mean, it also feels like, buying a house for the vast majority of people is the biggest transaction of their life. I mean, even the wealthy people, I mean, for the most part, I mean, the most expensive thing they're buying is also their house because they're buying a really expensive house.
Right.
And so to not be able to get a hold of someone just seems terrifying to me to not be able to get a hold of your loan officer or your realtor when you have a question or you're scared about something not working out. And so to only have an AI robot just sounds like terrifying.
Well, I think most people too want a real person saying, this is a great value.
Yeah.
You know, you're buying it what it's worth. And so, you know, to have a robot saying, oh yes, you know, it's this canned statement of, they're like, this person, you know, unless they can do the analytics and say, you know, here's the sales, here's why we think it's, you know, here's, you know, I mean, I don't know what the robot's going to do. Maybe the robot will show up and, you know, driving the car or self-driving vehicle. Yeah, who knows?
Well, it was funny because I had Marshall Pickett on the last show, and he was telling me an anecdote. I guess it was from Ryan Serhant of, you know, the big, you know, realtor you see online, and he was telling a story about, I guess he had a deal, and the seller and the buyer, you know, they were almost about to make the deal, and then the buyer and seller both went to AI and said, you know, the seller said, am I underpricing my home? And the AI said, yes.
Oh, wow.
And then the buyer went and said, am I overpaying for this home? And they said, yes.
Oh, good. So yeah, there you go.
They both thought they were underpricing or paying too much, and it was the same price. And it was like AI was just telling them what they wanted to hear.
Right.
And when you're buying a house, I mean, yes, you want someone who's going to do what you want done, but you also need someone to be like, this house might have a problem, or, you know, this house might be a little more than you can afford. And you want someone that's going to be like, yes, I know this is what you want, but here is some of the problems that you could have, and not just say yes, yes, yes to everything that they're asking for.
Right. So, you know, and, you know, buyers too, when they're buying a property, it's like, you feel like saying, you want to buy it or you want to steal it?
Yeah.
Because you want to steal it, we'll make them an offer, but we probably ain't going to take it. And I got friends that are like that. And I understand the program when I go into it, but you know, most buyers, they want to pay a price, close, and move on because they either need a place to go or you know, they got enough money where they're not worried about selling their old house. I mean, they already may have it sold, but it's just, I think it's important. You know, they want a hand holding.
Yeah.
You know, somebody that says, I'm confident what you're doing is the right thing.
Yeah.
Because if somebody came up and said, you know, the next door neighbor said, man, I can't believe you're paying that XYZ for that house. You know, some people would say, shut up, you know, it's my business.
Yeah.
Or the others would say, what do you mean?
Yeah.
You know.
Now, you know, what's kind of interesting about this kind of AI conversation, as you mentioned, is sort of that personal, you know, aspect of it. But also, of course, you know, marketing plays a part. And so it does seem like the likelihood is that it is going to make real estate agents, loan officers too, more efficient because some of the more mundane stuff AI can take care of.
Right.
And so it would allow you, like all productivity growth that we see, it allows you to do more business. And actually may even allow you to do more of what you're talking about, which is actually interacting with the client,
right,
and not have to do so much paperwork and everything.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful too, because it's like I've seen agents write remarks about a house, and I'm like, they don't talk like that. You know, it's like, wow, that's mighty eloquent. So
now, Wilmington's obviously gone through a lot, and we do have a lot of different parts of Wilmington, as we were talking about earlier. What do you see happening kind of with Wilmington going forward? Because you mentioned the 3 to 5% appreciation, which after COVID seems like anemic, when in reality that's actually not. As long as
kind of a normal market.
As long as your home is outpacing inflation, you're
right,
winning. And so, what do you kind of see happening? I mean, you still see a lot of growth with regards to the pricing. It's sort of like the more desirable places like Wrightsville Beach and places like that.
Yeah, I think so. Wrightsville's not a terribly huge island. I mean, if you look at the oceanfront houses, single family, I mean, there's, not a ton of those.
Yeah.
So somebody says they want that, you're kind of like, well, get your checkbook out. We'll get you one, but it's going to be expensive. I think that, the thing, you think about inflation. And so with inflation, the cost of goods and services are going up.
Yeah.
And so think about hiring a builder to build a house. And so the guy's fuel's going up, his labor's going up, because they all got to make more because they're, whatever they're paying for is costing more. So do you think the building, a home is going to get cheaper because of inflation? I don't think so. And so, let's go back and let's talk about the early 80s. So I bought a condo at Wrightsville Beach, a 4-bedroom condo on the water with 2 baths, 1,600 square feet, and I paid $70,000. and I made such little money. I had to get the owner to finance it. I put some money down, and then I went to refinance it like 2 years later, and my rate was 14%, and I was glad to get it. I think it was 82 or 3, but it was a $70,000 condo.
Yeah.
But paying 14%, it was like, I mean, I paid tons of interest for the first couple of years, but then I refinanced it about 9 3/4 or something like that. And I thought I was just stealing the money. So now we're at 6.5, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But the prices are so much more.
Yes.
But money's still pretty cheap historically if you look at where we were. And you had high inflation, late 70s, early 80s.
Oh yeah, yeah. That is kind of one of the interesting things, though, is that yes, rates historically are kind of close to normal, if not like a slightly better. But the prices are so much higher.
Right.
So people are feeling that. There's no doubt about that.
So if rates come down,
yeah,
I mean, we may be off to the races again because all of a sudden all these other people can afford more house and they'll move up. The hang up right now is somebody's got they paid $300,000 for a ranch house 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And 5 years ago, could they get money at 3% or less?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
So, if I were them, I'd almost say, if I can afford to buy another house, I'm going to keep this other one because I'm not paying any interest on it.
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, but that's part of the thing with, and I know a couple that they're adding on to their house in Midtown because they couldn't find another house, and plus they don't get rid of their mortgage.
Yeah.
And so they're stuck. I mean, they're not
golden
stuck.
handcuffs. Yeah.
But they don't want to go to 6.5 and, get a bigger house. They just add on.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing. And so you'll have clients call me and it'll be like, you got to play this. You got to figure it out. You got to do the math because you got to say, okay, you bought a house at 3.5%. That's
right.
great. But you got $300,000 in equity now in the house. So you could use that to put on a down payment.
Right.
So you put that down payment on a $750,000 house. Now, all of a sudden, you're back to 4 something and you're paying now 6%. Now, if you want to add on to the house, you're going to take out a, home equity line or your cash out or whatever. And so you got to figure out, does it make sense to just add on? Does it make sense to buy a new house?
Right.
Because people are sitting on still tons of equity.
Oh, yeah.
And so it does give them a lot of options. But that is a big, right now, as you mentioned, Midtown, you are seeing a lot of construction, a lot of add-ons that are happening.
Well, that, and, nowadays they call up and say, I want to tear down, to buy a lot in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
I mean, there's none. I mean, you're going to pay $600,000-700,000 for a half-acre lot or smaller. Yeah. They're like, I need more yard than that for $600,000-700,000. Okay, well, let's move a little away from Midtown. It's interesting.
Well, and so I think that the fact that we have now gone 5 years, the market is still not exactly normal. Like I said, we're still seeing some inventory crunch and in certain parts, especially here in Wilmington, definitely nationally as well. But I feel like people who maybe from 2001 or 2002 who were convinced that there was going to be this collapse like 2008 again, I think are kind of waking up like, okay, there's not going to be a crash. Like it's not going to happen. 2008 was essentially, was a combination of bad lending standards, certain products being pushed from, political pressure, whatever it was, bad appraisals. None of those exist now.
Right.
And so you have, you have prices, homes that are high, but there's no underlying problem that's going to cause sort of that crash. And so it's sort of people, I think, waking up to like, this is the reality. And what's crazy is that in Wilmington, there's been a lot of building.
Yeah.
And it's still not meeting the demand.
Right.
I think we saw since COVID, it was like 4 or 5% population growth, which is nuts.
Well, and the other
like
thing, all these new apartments they're building. Yeah. So somebody wants to move the area and they go, well, we can rent a really nice apartment with a pool and be near the beach and figure out really where we want to go. So if rates drop or more inventory comes on and the right house is out there, they're like, okay, we're good.
Yeah.
They'll buy something, but I think it'd be really difficult to move to a town and not know a thing about it and go buy a house.
Oh yeah.
And some folks come here, they buy a property and they go, well, this isn't kind of where we grew up. We want something more like a neighborhood we grew up in. And I'm like, I get it.
No, I get it. I mean, and what's interesting too, it's not only just the apartment complexes, but it's a situation where you talked about where someone goes, all right, we got to move out of this house. but we're going to hold on to it because it's like free money. So there's a ton of rentals because people can rent, and make money pretty easily, even charging maybe below market rent for a single family that they were in. And so that's also increased the rental supply, which puts a little pressure on the buyer side market, but you get why people are doing that.
Yeah.
Because
and then also we're seeing, a lot of these Airbnbs that are being sold because they're not getting the rental income they were during COVID. Because during COVID, it just stayed rented. Now it's like, people go, well, now we can go back to the beach because there's, place we can rent for a week or two rather than go to, someplace out in the middle of Midtown or whatever.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's definitely changed. I mean, it was interesting I had a client the other day, a couple weeks ago, who was looking to buy a place in Myrtle Beach. And they were like, yeah, we're only going to put like 20% down. And I said, because there's nowhere in Wilmington where you can put 20% down in cash flow. And yet Myrtle Beach is still a place where they could do that. I was kind of amazed because of how good the Airbnb market is. Because Myrtle Beach is looked at as a tourist location. Wilmington is too, but not as much. But that's the other thing I think a lot of people are waking up to is that, you could buy a house during COVID and put 3% down and make money renting it. And now you do need to have that equity.
Oh, yeah.
In order to make money, because there has been the rental market has seen so much supply increase. And so do you think that, so we've seen this increase in kind of rental market. You can't really build much in Wilmington. We're almost kind of out of land. There's only a little bit left that's still buildable.
Right.
So do you see like kind of the outer areas, kind of like Brunswick County and Pender, picking up that slack? It seems like that's what they've been.
Well, I think they have been for years. Yeah. Because, Brunswick Forest, Compass Point. The first time I went to Compass Point, I said, you may as well live in Whiteville. Yeah. And then, they put the loop in, and I'm like, well, it's pretty close to town, actually. Yeah. And it's a nice neighborhood. And it's just, you ride through, you see where the people are from that live there, and most are from out of state, which is, they want to get the hell out of, cold weather or whatever they don't want where they were from. But it's kind of interesting to have a melting pot in a neighborhood where you can learn about other people, and most times they get along. Yeah. Every now and then you got an expert that you don't want to be next door neighbors to, but it happens,
Well, that is interesting that you are seeing this expansion of housing, but the infrastructure, not like water and sewer, obviously that's there, but it's like having that grocery store, having that convenience store, having those restaurants. The growth in Leland has been insane. Oh yeah. It's nuts what they have down. Now you don't have to leave Leland. Before everyone was driving over the bridge because if you wanted to go out to eat somewhere, you had to come to Wilmington. And now you don't have to. And so, that's good for Wilmington. That's good for Leland. I think it's good for everyone, but we do still need more of that infrastructure. Well, in parts of Leland.
And the other thing, you think about up on 421 where the Amazon building is, and if you've never been in that industrial park, it's amazing. And there's a lot of employees over there, and it's very convenient to Leland. Yeah. Or Castle Hayne, because they can go across that North Bridge. So, those roads weren't there before. And so go back and talk about 1990, 91. Yeah. A lot of my friends, if they lived in Charlotte, they went to Myrtle Beach. If they lived in like northeastern part of the Wilson or Kinston or, Rocky Mount, they would go to Morehead City. Because it was closer. There was, 421 would take forever to get down here. Once I-40 opened up, it was amazing because that first year it changed dramatically. It was just, people would come in and say, we normally go to Morehead or Myrtle or a lot of them would go to Ocean Isle or to Holden Beach. And then we started seeing a lot of folks coming in from Charlotte or Winston-Salem. It changed over, a year's period of time just because of the access. Oh, yeah. Which was pretty amazing to see. And, I remember we used to do kind of road shows going to Winston. If like a business was getting bought out, like Piedmont Aviation got bought out, we'd take a bunch of folks up there and have a cocktail party and say, y'all need to come to Wrightsville Beach and spend that money with us. And so we hadn't done that in a while, but, they do road shows in the Northeast. And it's interesting who shows up down here. And when I first went into real estate too, we get call-ins from Long Island. And the old-timers in Long Island would go, well, before World War II, Long Island was a sleepy little, beach community, and it was just really nice. And now we've got high taxes, and it's just congested. And so I would ask them, I said, well, what do your taxes run? They go, well, they're about $10,000 a year. And they said, well, they tell me how much their house worth. And they said, well, how much would the taxes there be? I said, it's about $2,000. They said, I'll be there next week. Because they were like, they were just done. Because the taxes kept going up and congestion was terrible. And, there are a lot of folks that moved down and others bought beach houses and still live up there, but they just want to get away from it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I-40, depending on who you talk to, is either the greatest thing that's ever happened to Wilmington or the worst.
Oh, I know. Well, for real estate, it was wonderful. I mean, you want a way to get there.
Before we go, I did want to, because you did bring in some props.
Okay.
Because that's another thing that's changed dramatically is sort of what's required when you're filling out a contract to buy or sell a house.
So,
I mean, because obviously I see them all the time. And you showed it to me, and I thought it was just the first page, and you're like, no, that's the whole thing.
so what I brought, the first, so you take a 30-hour course, and after you take a 30-hour course, you're like, you don't know anything about paperwork or doing anything in real estate other than buyer and seller. And back in that day, it was buyer beware. There was no residential property disclosure, no disclosure. It was like, the Wild West. I mean, you went to buy a house and you better have your team show up and tell you what's wrong with it, because otherwise you would have no idea. So this is a 1989 form. It's a listing agreement and it's one page. And basically, they want you to put, sign your name, put your social security number on there. That was always good,
And shredder.
Right. And so, the following additional terms and conditions shall be part of this contract. They let realtors write that in the contract. So that is why now it's, the listing agreement is, how many pages is it? 7 pages.
7 pages.
Because it covers all the stuff that we used to screw up.
That's good. I mean it's probably for the benefit of you guys.
It's to keep keep the realtors out of the courtroom.
Yeah.
Because I remember you get an offer to purchase and somebody wrote in there, grandma's this, that, and the other, would remain, with the seller. And you're like, what is that? I'm not even sure what they're talking about. But,
then you got the actual contract.
Yeah. This listing agreement was 3 pages, and that was 2001.
Okay.
So we've come a long way. We're still killing trees, and
well, a lot of it's more, DocuSign. A lot of that. Yeah.
Well, true, right? And nobody ever prints these things.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this is an offer to purchase. It's 2 pages, and so once again, the offer doesn't ask for the Social Security number. I guess just the listing agreement so they can give it to the closing attorney. And then here's the new offer. It's this one's 14 pages.
14 pages.
Yeah.
So from 2 to 14.
So it covers everything.
Well, actually, it makes sense. So we went from 1-page listing to 7. So that was a 7-fold increase. And we went from 2 to 14. Right. So they both increased.
Well, they like to keep the math straight, But
but like I said, it seems like, oh no, that's awful. But really, it's about protecting you guys. It is probably a good thing.
And also, when a buyer or seller comes to us and say, well, where we get a request for repairs, and they go, well, what do we do? And so you go down to the section where it says about repairs. It says selling it as is or in the present condition, unless the buyer and seller agree to other, terms.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I don't like that. I said, well, that's what the contract says. We can't redline it and take it out. Now you can go to an attorney and write an offer to purchase and say, if you don't do what you say we're going to do, if you back out of the contract and the buyer goes, well, I'm going to sue you for performance of the contract. Well, that doesn't say this anymore, but an attorney can put it in there.
Yeah. It's, even on the lending side, when I talk to loan officers who've been in the business before 2008, and they would tell me how you could essentially change the rate and that would impact your commission. And so you could give someone a higher rate and get more commission or charge them a lower rate. And obviously good loan officers would balance that. Yeah. So if a client needed that lower rate and then someone didn't really care about rate, you'd balance it out with them. But then you had like the shady ones who just gave everyone crappy rates so they could get higher commission.
Right.
And that's gone now. Now we get paid. No
Well,
matter what the rate is.
those lenders are probably dead too.
And so that's changed, but it's a good thing for the consumer because
Right.
now we can't manipulate anything.
Right.
We're getting the same amount of commission. So we always have obviously the best interest to, and like I said, a lot of the people who are abusing that were kind of the shadier people. And so most people were doing it correctly, but they didn't have taken that out of our hands.
Well,
and so
and
it's
I
a
think,
good thing.
I think too, with a compensation agreement, it spells out who's getting paid what, up front. So it's like they should know if they read the document as to who's getting paid what and who's paying it.
Before you go, I did want to ask you, because we had, the big NAR lawsuit got all
Right.
this attention. It's going to change the real estate industry. I think I've seen maybe one instance where the seller wasn't, or the buyer wasn't going to pay the commission or whatever it was.
Right.
Have you seen a major change, or is it still?
I haven't seen a major change,
Okay.
but I had a seller on a piece of land that said basically he would pay the seller's agent, but he wouldn't pay the buyer's agent.
Okay.
So we had multiple offers, and I'm telling these other agents, now your buyer's going to have to pay your commission because my seller won't pay it.
Yeah.
And so, one got the property, the other two, one said he'd be willing to pay the buyer's agent, but he was out of the country, so it was a mess. But one person got it, and the other two were mad.
But so it's kind of rare, is what you're.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
everyone thought, the way it was reported, you thought like everyone was going to do that, but it seems like most people are still sticking to that standard.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is in commercial real estate, there's a lot of buyers that are paid by their agent, and it's not paid by the seller.
Gotcha.
But it's spelled out in the buyer agency agreement. So.
Yeah, I mean, it was just sort of interesting because everyone, it was reported as this is going to change everything, and then it didn't really change anything,
Well,
except for like a few instances.
The documentation and I think it's we have to get the documentation signed up front.
Yeah.
Like if somebody calls us, say I want to go see your listing, we got to get it signed.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, it's what we do, but historically, if I showed a house to somebody and they don't like me and I'm not sure I want to work with them, we can just part ways and I have to tear up the paperwork. Nowadays, we have to tear up the paperwork or say, please send me an email that says, I don't like you, I'm not going to deal with you, and just let me know that we're no longer in business together. So, but it just has to be spelled out. So it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like everyone sort of adapted to it. Well, Lee, I appreciate you taking the
Thank
time and kind of giving us kind of your take on what you've seen in 40 years here in real estate in Wilmington. So thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot. Good to see you.